to me, it seems like a necessary polarity for the keep it moving, for growth, because I would say my instinctual desire is to grow. Like, if I was told there would be no more growth and development, that would feel like a instinctual threat to my system. Like it would, like you would be telling me you're, going to snuff me out. So, those are not surprising to me that they are working on each other because they keep creating movement.
In a world moving faster than our minds were designed to handle, mental health is becoming one of the defining challenges of our time. Welcome to Mental Health in a Modern World with holistic health practitioner Greg Schmaus. After overcoming severe anxiety and OCD in his own life, Greg dedicated the past decade to helping others heal through a fully integrated approach to mental health, combining lifestyle coaching, psycho-emotional healing, mindfulness, and archetypal work. Over the years, he's facilitated thousands of sessions, guiding people back to peace, clarity, and a deeper connection with themselves. Each week, Greg shares powerful solo insights, conversations with leading voices in holistic healing, and immersive live coaching sessions that take you inside the healing process itself. New episodes every Friday. Follow the show and start reclaiming sovereignty over your mind in a modern world. Here's Greg.
Justin, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for this.
So you and I go back quite a ways. A lot of people don't know that you were actually my introduction to Paul Chek. You were my introduction to becoming a Chek practitioner. So, you've played a critical role in my journey and my evolution. So I would love, before we dive into our pretty unique topic today, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about your background and your work, a little bit of your story, if you're open to that.
Sure. We do have a pretty long history, which has been fun to reflect on over the years as both of us have evolved into different kinds of practice and work. And it's been really cool to watch your journey. And I feel really grateful that in the beginning there, I was able to kind of catalyze, hopefully, some access to some of those things, and you were able to run with it. It was really cool because my background is more in exercise science, and that's where I started. And then when I started coaching and personal training people, I just found I needed more than what was given to me at that point. And then the Chek Institute did a wonderful job of expanding out into where it could help people where they were at. And I think a lot of that is what has driven my desire to keep learning and evolving how I work with people, was noticing where people had needs that weren't getting met by the traditional practices. And so that took me through a lot of the Chek system and took me through a lot of other corrective and holistic approaches to healing people in my area of expertise, mostly of chronic orthopedic pain, and dovetailing that into the essential parts of their complete well-being. So it required looking outside of that scope as well in order to be able to actually get people long-term results. So, which took me more towards getting an LMT so I could do hands-on work with people, and then diving into what's happening emotionally and spiritually as well. So, we both care about the whole person being healed, and I really have enjoyed that your emphasis is in the mental health side of things and my emphasis being on the structural side of things, but neither one is completely far apart. They're just sort of, polarities that balance each other out. So it's been 20 plus years of working with people, and it's been really interesting to see how your perception of working with people changes, I would say, more than anything.
What I love about our work is kind of how they complement each other. My focus being more on the mental health, your focus being on the physical health and physical well-being. But as you said, those are not separate entities. And a lot of times to heal the mind, you have to focus on the body. And a lot of times to heal the body, you have to focus on the mind. And so they're really one integrated system.
Always. The thing that I found really beautiful about using movement as the entry point is that I found that people had a lot of emotional and spiritual challenges that they were uncomfortable maybe directly addressing, But as things came up somatically in a safe environment, it was easier for them to access it from that entry point. So people just pick, it seems like, the entry point they're the most comfortable with, but we're all going to get to the same place if we keep going. There's no way to find true resolution without actually addressing all those issues. And movement is so much, in my opinion, so much more accessible because it feels a little less personal sometimes, even though that's mostly an awareness or an access thing. And so I found that I liked working with people who were in the process of self-discovery through movement. So as they were moving and learning how to change things that were painful in their body, it required them to grow and open up their mind at the same time. Otherwise, we were just really kind of patching them up and they were coming back with the same thing. So some people were ready for that, some people aren't. And then that's kind of the fun part, is how can you help people, shepherd them a little bit along so that they can get what they need, even if they came for something other than that in the beginning. So
Yeah. I love that. And, one of the topics that we're going to dive into today is archetypes. And one of the reasons I love the exploration of archetypes is archetypes are really the language of the psyche. And so if we want to ask ourselves, like, what drives my choices and behaviors, you're always going to arrive at some archetypal perspective or some archetypal vehicle that is what's really driving, our thoughts, our beliefs, our choices, our behaviors, which all then get expressed through the physical body. We had the opportunity to do your archetype wheel a few weeks back. So I'm just curious what your experience of that was, going through the archetypes, choosing the ones that most resonated as really representing who Justin is, and then going ahead and casting the wheel, which we'll get into.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I found it both empowering and illuminating at the same time. So because it's aligns with my beliefs around it coming from me and not from the practitioner supporting me find what I don't know within myself, then the wheel feels really wonderful that way, because when you're casting it, it's truly coming from me. And then it was surprising at times. I know that was really cool, because going purely from my intuition and how it felt, that's always really illuminating how accurate it can be, but also surprising that you really couldn't have thought your way there, which is what we're kind of pointing at. And so I think it's pretty magical, and I look forward to seeing how you interpret these things, particularly as you showed me they interact with each other in the wheel. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Instead of trying to go through all 12 houses, I thought maybe we choose a few specific houses and really kind of take a deeper dive into it.
Yeah.
If that's cool with you.
Yeah.
And so just a little background. So for people that, and we'll link maybe like a PDF to the wheel itself so people can have a visual. So if you imagine a wheel or imagine like a pizza pie with 12 slices or 12 sections on it. And so each of those sections or each of those pieces represents one of the houses on the wheel. And so the 12 houses actually correlate with the 12 astrological houses. Each of those houses really represents a key area of your life that you engage in and participate in on a daily basis. So we choose the 12 archetypes that we all have. Now, 4 of them are going to be universal. We all have the 4 survival archetypes. We all have a child, a victim, a saboteur, and a prostitute. And the reason is because those are kind of like the 4 legs of the table of survival, right?
Yeah.
Those are the essential archetypes that we need in order to survive. There was a time in which we felt victimized. And so the victim archetype helps us be aware of any potential situation in which we might be victimized. There was a time we needed to sabotage ourselves for our own survival. There's a time we needed to prostitute ourselves, maybe for our own security. And so those 4 survival archetypes we all have, and then the other 8 vary person to person. And so what we'll do today is we'll explore a couple of Justin's archetypes, where those archetypes are on the wheel, which houses, and we'll kind of dive into and kind of peel back some of the layers of it.
That sounds, yeah.
So the first one that I'd love to dive into is the addict, because the addict is an archetype that is so common. And when we talk about addict, we're not just talking about substance abuse. We're talking about any unhealthy relationship with a person, place, or thing that you create some sort of dependency around. And
Absolutely.
so I'm curious if you're open to sharing what your relationship with that archetype has been over the course of your journey and why it was one of the core 12 that you chose for yourself.
Yeah. I feel there's a lot of content there. The archetype itself, the behavior of utilizing some relationship to get something I need that may not have an outcome either behaviorally or experientially that you want, but still meets a need that you really need, has certainly been a common theme for me. And I feel like it stems from needing coping strategies at a young age for not knowing or having other practices to process challenging emotions or even track what the need is. So I find I heavily relied on that archetype in order to shift my state whenever I was in a dysregulated place, unbeknownst to me. I wouldn't know that I was dysregulated, but I knew I would get some sort of relief from engaging in a behavior or a substance, like you said. And so exercise even was one of those things for me in the very beginning. I feel when I started using exercise as a way to increase my confidence and my sense of worth and well-being when I was in my later teenage years, it was very helpful in that way. And I feel very healthy in the beginning. And then it became where I couldn't not do it. So it had given me a really good gift, and I felt a lot better about myself on the inside, which was really the reason for doing it. And then I enjoyed doing it. And so it can become, and it's a encouraged behavior by society. And so it was interesting. I wasn't ever the person that exercised too many days of the week, but I always worked myself too hard to actually recover from. And then it had all these negative impacts on my ability to show up in personal relationships, my mental stability, just irritability, and feeling resourced in other activities. And I was so attached to that strategy as a way to feel good about myself that even though those other things were negative, I was unwilling to see how it was connected for a very long time. And not until many injuries and personal relationship challenges and burnout several times did I begin to frame my relationship with it in a way that it was supportive and sustainable. And I feel like it's an important one because a lot of times even things that are quote unquote healthy for us can become addictions and turn into damaging behaviors. And I find it more difficult to change behaviors that need to be modulated instead of got rid of. Like if you're just throwing it out, like if someone has, a really damaging substance abuse problem, you could just stop using the substance and avoid it with support and all these things. But like eating and exercise and those things can be difficult because you can't just stop eating, and it wouldn't be healthy for me to just stop exercising. That's one of the primary ones to me. And then a lot of the same ones that many people struggle with, stimulants, so, caffeine or any other stimulation in order to shift a state to feeling more stable and clear-headed and in control and all of those things, but also ignoring how it affects sleep, recovery. And then really the big one was how these behaviors were affecting my personal relationships and how I could actually regulate and show up to communicate with people. And it was very damaging for a lot of relationships, particularly personal, intimate relationships, because I would be completely exhausted from overstimulating myself through exercise and caffeine and other things. And then that would lead to having no bandwidth. So my life became very small. Like it became
Yeah.
very restricted. And all of that was with the inability to notice how something I really wanted to be doing was causing me harm.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You know, a couple things that were coming up for me, and then we'll get into the second house, which is where the addict lies on your wheel. So you mentioned using addictions to help regulate.
100%.
And one thing that I have found, and I'm curious your experience with this or perspective on it, is a lot of times when we need addictions to help us regulate, a lot of times it's because we didn't have primary caretakers growing up that were able to help regulate us.
Yes.
And a lot of times we felt responsible to regulate them.
Yes.
And so that attachment injury a lot of times creates later on in life the need for some addictive pattern to help regulate us.
That feels very true to me. And in my own personal experience, being an only child with a very attentive mother and a very busy father, and no one else to kind of diffuse what's happening. There, I hear other people with siblings speak about how they could at least talk to each other about their parents, and so I feel like that context made it more challenging to notice. Because there was nothing to contrast against, really. There wasn't someone else there in the thick of it to be like, oh, that doesn't seem okay. And my experience in retrospect is that my own caregiver was unaware of her own dysregulation pretty much all the time. And very classically, just in the form of being anxious and then playing that out by being very busy and very much always in motion, and then placing that intensity onto me, the child, and not really regulating herself first. And so I had not only, when I would ask for regulation, it would come in the form of some soothing, but the other person isn't regulated either. And so it was confusing because you're like, oh, is this how I feel better? But I can feel something that feels like you're not okay too. And like you said, Greg, then you're like, well, I notice that they feel better when it seems like I feel better. So exactly as you said, that creates this interesting dynamic where in order for my needs to get met, because that's my primary caregiver, I have to present as being okay and feel and help the other person be okay, because, I'm a dependent at that point. Like I don't have the means and access to really support myself as a child. And therefore you create a very odd dynamic where it creates hypervigilance for me to make sure that that person is okay, because they're the person that feeds and houses and loves you. And they're completely unaware. And at the time, obviously, as a child, I'm completely unaware. And it can make it a really small bubble where it seems like it's working, but then it doesn't work outside of that bubble. And it was never really working in there either, but you didn't have any context or contrast to notice how it could be another way.
Right.
So yeah, man, I would say that was a big reason, because then you need some other thing to help me.
Right.
I'm not getting that modeling or tools, or even witnessing someone in your family be dysregulated and then watch them regulate. And you're watching, if someone's dysregulated, they ignore it and then project it onto the other person. So
Yeah.
that was definitely my experience.
Yeah. And so if we look at the second house relates to our values and our worth. So how we value ourselves, what we value in life, and where we derive self-worth from. And so it's a really interesting house to have the addict, because if we look at, for example, the use of stimulants, a lot of times we might get addicted to the use of stimulants to help us continuously perform in the areas that we derive self-worth from.
Totally. 100%.
And then I'm curious on the other side, anytime that there's a threat to our self-worth, if sometimes there's another form of addiction that we might use to soothe.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we have two sides of one coin, like one to stimulate,
And
to
one
get
to
me to do the things that I derive worth from, and then to soothe anytime there's an injury to the worth. I'm curious if that resonates with you.
It does. I mean, because I had a very precarious relationship with alcohol for a long time, and it was not until I got really physically ill after I got COVID and I had my nervous system couldn't handle that kind of stress that I was able to kind of uncouple myself from that as a soothing technique. But it would always be the thing, and culturally where I grew up in the South, it's a pretty normalized behavior, that it was the soma of the masses there. So if anything was a little difficult to handle, can I get you a drink? And it was as normal as someone being like, are you thirsty? Can I get you some water? And so almost anything could be solved, at least in the immediate, with handing someone an alcoholic beverage. And so that would be the push-pull. You'd need to perform all day and use that stimulation to get all that worth. But then after that, how do you come back down and regulate to where you can rest? And Ian, like you said, if you had an injury or some sort of emotional challenge that came up, you may not want to stimulate more, but you want something to soothe, like you said. And that was what I utilized for a long time. And it has a very razor's edge, I think, where it can be beneficial a little bit for folks, but as we know, it's continues to come out how unhealthy it is for you in any amount, and just promotes actually more neurological damage and dysregulation. So of all the things that was the most dysregulating as an addiction, I would say utilizing that as a coping strategy is very much dysregulating. And you can see it in more subtle forms too, like maybe you use exercise to stimulate, and then you use breath work to come back down. And there's an interesting part there to me where it just depends on the intention.
Mm-hmm.
So do I have to have it, or could I use it and it be helpful? Mm-hmm. And with these other more addictive and more damaging behaviors, there's no question there. There's no check-in beforehand. And so it's not really of conscious choosing. And that, I think, was really, really clarified for me as I changed how I navigated regulating myself over the years. Yeah.
Beautiful. The archetype I would love to go to next is in your 6th house, which is the detective.
Oh, fun. And
the reason I want to go there is because I had a personal memory of coming to you many years ago. I first came to you as a client when I was playing golf in college. And I remember you doing those incredible assessments, like the 2-hour check assessments.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated how you would look at the body, take all the measurements and, all the different testing. And you might have someone that has, I don't know, plantar fasciitis in their left foot.
Mm-hmm.
And you track it back to an atlas subluxation.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are like, how the hell would you track a foot issue back to your, C1?
Yep.
But the detective in the 6th house, and the 6th house governs your work.
That makes sense.
I would love for you to share a little bit about how you've seen the detective as one of like the key archetypes in your workspace.
Beautifully said, Greg. I mean, that has been really one of the more passionate and joyful parts of my work. The primary one, just connecting with the client and working with them directly. And then the other part is the detective part there, which is being able to take a lot of information take in a whole lot of information, as much as I can handle, and then synthesize that into more elegant solutions that are balanced with all that information. And I think the dance of that has been what's really fun for me, is if it's about seeing this whole picture, and then once I have investigated all of that and I have this model, basically I end up feeling like I create everyone's like individual model of what's going on for them. And then once I have a working model of them in my system, then it becomes much easier to ask through the model, what would be beneficial to this person? I know what their life is like. I know what their body is like. I know what their nutrition is like. I know what their health status is like. I saw them move. I put my hands on them, and when I do assessments and get a sense of the tone and the fascia. And so you get all of this wonderful information and create a model. And then instead of looking at a problem and addressing the one problem, I can ask through that model, well, what would be good for Greg? You know, I remember when you came in and you were having back pain, and I remember, taking all these measurements, and, it was really interesting because I had this sense that you would do what I asked you to do, which also comes into the model. How much compliance is the client going to have? There's entire books on patient compliance and client compliance and everything. So I knew I could give you, and I gave you, as I recall, a lot of stretches. And I gave you stretches with really long holds, things that most people won't do. But I knew that you wanted to keep playing and you wanted to have your back not hurt so much. And it was then easy to, through that model of understanding where you were at that moment, give you a plan that felt like it resonated with you to get what you wanted. So the detective part is really fun to me, because without looking a little deeper, getting enough information and collecting all of that, I'm unclear on how people would make a suggestion to someone that would be considering them as a whole person. And I found that with you, like, because you were committed and you did all of the things. And I remember also, once you then came to be a mentee, that it was surprising how that wasn't something we did as much as you thought I did. Like, you thought I got to do that like every day, and that was the only thing I did. I mean, having done thousands of assessments, but over the years, but you were doing, you really loved that. And I remember you coming in and we would do some, but then the detective continues when you're then in application. And so within that assessment, I think it's very obvious, but where it becomes a little more subtle is that's the same. I'm adjusting that model constantly while I'm working with the client. The assessments just allow me to have a faster update with the model. So I have a better working model to begin with. And then I remember you chatting with me about, like, man, we're talking to people a lot, and it's a lot of like people interaction. But underneath that, I'm watching and taking in and surveying what's happening in their whole system. And so it becomes this interesting challenge with coaching, where I found that was really engaging for me, is that I would be doing metacognition on it. I'd be like talking to them about one thing that they're talking about while doing something else with my mind at the same time. And, anybody who coaches knows that's happening, but I found that really engaging, and clients would then report things to be like, well, how did you know that? Or how did that, like the Atlas thing or something like that. And it all comes from having a keen awareness, which is potentially a gift of some of that hypervigilance that came from some of my earlier life experience. But there's just a deep passion to understand and a curiosity that drives me looking to discover what hasn't been found yet. And most of the time, there's lots of that to be found if you're willing to be patient and look. And I found that a lot of clients will come in, even like yourself, you'd been to other people, right? And you had gotten other support, had other coaches and everything. Right. and you told them that you had a challenge and all this, but nobody took the time to look that deep. So I would say the depth is also the thing that was really, it is and has been really enjoyable to me with my work. Is it's not just about how fast can we do this, it's how complete can we do this. You know, how deep can we go, and how close can we get to the actual core problem, and how many of them are there, and then if there's a lot of them, which one should we address first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when you were sharing, what was coming up for me is how, you know, in shamanism, they consider shamans to be master trackers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're doing in the gym or on the treatment table is shamanism, because you're really acting as a master tracker of not just the physical body, but also listening to how someone might be talking about their pain.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful connection there, because everything is the same thing. So like whether you're tracking their energetic experience or their spiritual experience or their emotional experience, their body is giving the same information, and it's this willingness to see, like this willingness to see it. Over the years, that has become, because of so many of those assessments, because of so many people to work with, it's beautiful now that it requires less in the sense of numbers of tests to get to the place of knowing what's going on, because that has become more intuitive over the years. And the tracking is really interesting, how it's progressed to where you can know and see inside of people, so to speak. Like I can feel where I can follow, like you said, a plantar fasciitis in a foot. I can follow just the energy, so to speak, all the way back up to where the blockage is. And that blockage may be a stiff joint, it may be, you know, a tight area, but I really love that and I appreciate that, because it feels like that level of work for people, even though on the outside it may look, you know, 2D structural, but it's the farthest thing from that. It's a very beautiful way to work with people's whole system and track where they have energy leaks or where they have blockages, and then work with them in movement. You know, have you found that with your own work, having that background in the Czech Institute and that work, have you found that really helpful when you're tracking from a shamanistic side, to also have a lot of structural information to dovetail them together? And I'm kind of wondering how that has played out in your work.
Yeah, it was helpful, obviously, studying Paul's work and learning how to do those assessments, but also when you have that knowledge, the real skill I find is developed by tracking yourself. And
Yes.
so, you know, for example, I remember years ago, back when I was struggling with some physical and mental health challenges, I would notice that I would have this, let's say, increase in anxiety, or this, nagging, right neck shoulder pain. But I would notice, okay, well, when those symptoms came on, I noticed my breathing changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like for some reason, I felt like, oh, like I'm not really able to breathe into my abdomen and use my diaphragm like I normally would for some reason. And then I would notice, oh, well, my gut feels a little inflamed.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the Czech knowledge, we know that, inflammation in the gut's going to shut down the abdominal wall, which includes the diaphragm.
Absolutely.
And so when that happens, one thing that's going to happen is my accessory respiratory muscles are going to come online,
Mm-hmm.
which might cause my neck pain.
Mm-hmm.
Or my respiratory rate's going to increase, which is going to stimulate more of a sympathetic nervous system response, which might increase my anxiety.
And your neck pain.
And my neck pain. And so just by really tracking my own system, then you're able to really offer that to others. But the body of knowledge, whether it's, the relationship between the visceral system and the musculoskeletal system, or the various systems of the body, that definitely gives you a foundation to become that tracker.
That's right.
But then it's applying it to yourself first.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because for the lion's share of my training personally, when I trained myself, a lot of that was solo. A lot of that was without anybody around. What I found in retrospect, looking at that, what that allowed for is there wasn't someone else to tell me something. So with that body of knowledge, the most important part, like you said, is that you spend that much time paying attention and tracking your own system. And that was already a practice for me. And it felt like a necessary practice, because I didn't have someone else there to tell me. So I would just continue to track my own system through whether it was positional or sensational or, like you said, visceral or psychological, and be aware as a detective on myself with no other input. So the input is me executing some sort of movement, but it's an exploration all the time. So it's constantly exploring. You could check out and just do the thing, and that would get the thing done, but that's not what you're talking about. So that's a hard thing to describe to some folks who haven't maybe done martial arts or some sort of high level dance or something where there's a high level of self-awareness from a motor control standpoint. People who have done that and talk to each other have this kindred spirit of understanding. Well, it's like you have cultivated enough tracking and sensory motor awareness that we're like on the same level and attuned about what we're doing. And I feel like that gave me a really wonderful kind of an empowerment in order to help people, because they maybe have not spent 20, 30 years of their life paying attention to their system when they move or in general. So then someone can come in, and because you've done that, like you said, you've had to chop wood, carry water for many years in yourself, it's really cool to watch how that lets people access that medicine, so to speak, really quickly. So this whole there's no wasted effort. I didn't realize that at the time, that was what was happening. I was doing it for myself. I was doing it to be able to give, at a more superficial level, that back to clients. But with sustaining that cultivation of tracking and movement practice for that long, now I've been able to realize the benefit of that to folks that really don't. There's a lot of folks that really don't have much in the way of understanding what's happening in their system.
Yeah.
And so helping them out with that, for me, it was something that I took for granted for a long time. Mm-hmm. I felt like, well, of course, everybody's doing this, or they can do this. And in reality, that has not been proven to be my observation of clients and friends and family and stuff. So that's where that archetype really shines, as being uniquely in my wheel versus maybe not someone else's, and also uniquely in the area of interest of mine that, if you're not a detective, then that's not your thing. So it's really cool to see how these archetypes also power our gifts, and they can really be a pattern of energy that you can help understand, wow, what was motivating me to continue to do that day after day, week after week, year after year, in spite of, it being easier to just not. Yeah. And so it has to come from the inside. And so these wheels are really cool, because then it starts to clarify your motivation, I feel like, in a certain way.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's kind of like a blueprint, kind of the engine.
Yeah.
Kind of driving
you see under the hood a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to do two more. I'd love to go to the 9th house, which is the domain of spirituality.
Okay.
And the 9th house represents our relationship with spirit, which could include God, religion, any domain of religion, spirituality, relationship with God. And you have the Hermit there, which I absolutely love, because the Hermit always has to know through direct inward experience.
Yes.
And so much of religion and spirituality and what people talk about in those realms are not from direct experience. They're not from inner knowing. They're from regurgitation of what someone else said or what someone else experienced. Whether it's, in church and temple, or even especially in New Age spirituality, where
Yeah.
people, might use the fancy words and say the right things, but you could tell based on the energy that those words are carrying that it's not really coming from a deep place within themselves of, I've experienced that or I embody that. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about why you feel like the Hermit is in your ninth house and governing your domain of spirituality.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember from a very young age in more the area of the divine, feeling like I already had a direct connection in a certain way. And so then not really understanding what that was at the time, but feeling anything that wanted to put a intermediary between me and the divine immediately didn't feel good to me. It didn't feel right in my system. And so oddly enough, I grew up going to like a Lutheran church and all that stuff. And the one thing that did resonate with me was that the Lutheran church left, Catholicism and the Church of England really in order to, say that you don't need a priest to talk to God. And so that was the only thing that like in there. And then the rest of it, I was like, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And I can't just accept it. And so like you said, with the Hermit, if it doesn't have your own direct experience, which then led to it being a hermetic experience where you do it on your own. Like I would just do what I could to continue to open up my awareness. And there was a lot of challenge there because I didn't have a lot of guides in the beginning. But anything that felt true in that way, I could trust because I had fully experienced it myself. And then as my life progressed and I had more challenges and the need for that to be cultivated, there was a lot of experiences I had, whether it be through personal challenge or plant medicine or other things that allowed me to experience God on my own, and experience it in a different way within myself. And that allowed me to access it within myself without an intermediary, as you said. And once I had more direct experience in some special ways like that, it felt more authentic to share my connection with the divine, with the world, and with clients and people from my heart. Whereas before, it felt anything that was maybe told to me, I just couldn't possibly say it without it feeling fake. And it also, the Hermit archetype, the desire to go and find out on my own and then come back and give it to people was always very powerful in my system. So if I had a challenge for the first half of my life, I was like, I need to just figure this out, and I need to see if I can figure it out. And the only challenge ran when there was no more logical way to figure it out. Yeah. And so then I just needed some guides to figure out how to unify and my heart and my mind together, and so to have access to that. But it's always been in that context of I enjoy solo practice and I enjoy solo deep experiences. And even if they're solo but shoulder to shoulder with some other people, that really is okay too. But it's having your own unique individual internal experience, knowing from the inside out, and then feeling really clear and really grounded in that truth. And then it becomes very powerful to share. Yeah. Because then it doesn't come out, like you said, with any special words per se. And it becomes an embodied principle that can be allowed to unfold with people and myself as it needs to. So it's less limiting for me. I think it's a more challenging front end in my experience, because it's a solo thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it is more free once you go that route for me. So I think it was more about freedom, and it was more about self-knowing and self-connection to the divine, because it didn't feel like if I just accepted something that was said and practiced that from dogma, that it would get me there. Like I would always have doubt. And so fundamentally, the knowing is the absence of the doubt. So until I could eliminate all the internal doubt in any given challenge, the hermit kind of archetype is what would power that. It'd be like, okay, let's go back to this. Let's keep digging into this. And then the most beautiful thing was to learn that you can have support and still do that. People, especially the way support is given now, is usually directed towards that, towards the individual figuring it out on their own. So that led me more towards spiritual development that was less dualistic and more from a place of self than a place of other.
Yeah.
So it's very much a part of me, and it's cool to see it as a pattern of energy, and then it allows me to navigate my life in a way that I honor it instead of being either surprised by it or trying to go against it and it not working out and being surprised why that doesn't work out. So yeah, it's been a really powerful archetype, and kind of like the detective, they go together for me. You know, I'll be using both of those things, you know, at the same time sometimes. But one of the more beautiful things is letting go of the detective when in direct spiritual experience. So there is no tracking sometimes. There's just direct transmission and just receiving. And that just feels authentic to me, I guess is what I would say. And it didn't feel authentic in other forms that were offered to me, you know. So, and that's why also, even like you said, the new age spiritual languaging can sometimes also give me the same feeling I had growing up in a church environment, where I was like, I have the same exact feeling I did when I was listening to these things, where I don't know if you know what you're talking about either.
Yeah.
And occasionally you will run into someone who says the same words, but they really already have it, and then you feel it, like you said. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, a couple things that I loved about what you shared is the hermit relates to obviously solitude and introspection and inner mastery. But after the hermit achieves inner mastery, it then steps back into the world as a guide.
Mhm.
You know, if you look at the hermit in the tarot, it's holding a lantern. It's walking holding a lantern, so it's a guiding light for others.
Mhm.
And so you mentioned, you know, after that solitude, after that inner mastery, going and sharing it, which across from your hermit is where you have the healer in your house of communication,
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
which is really cool how the hermit goes inward, does the work of self mastery, and then comes out, and then the healer shares it with others, whether it's verbally, through presence, you know, in any way, shape, or form. But you can then see, like you were talking about, the oppositions, how they're kind of working with each other.
And this is really beautiful, because that is the pattern I've seen in my life. And it's like a spiral, and it just keeps getting bigger, where I would do that, and maybe it was a small thing, and then you share a little small thing, and it starts to accumulate. And there's been interesting times in my life where there's longer hermit times and deeper insights and integrations that then come back. And then there really is this authentic, deep desire to share that. And it's really satisfying for me to share that with people, in the same way that I mentioned earlier about the detective part, where I put in that inner mastery effort and work in hopes of then when I share it, it's more clear to that person. It's easier to access. It's more understandable. It's actionable. It feels safe. It's all of those things, and it's funny to hear those. It's clearly those needs of safety and clarity, and you know, being for the person's benefit. Those feel like needs that in my earlier life, where when I was growing up as a child, were challenging for me. And so it feels also nicely motivated by my desire to support people having to go through less pain than I did. In any given area, I can provide support because I remember and viscerally and deeply to my core know what it felt like to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun. And then connecting and attuning in that way feels really natural to me. And so it is an interesting dichotomy because in some parts of my life, I'm very social and wanting to be interacting with people, while there's also that other part with the Hermit where in order to make another jump forward in what I'm offering to the world, I have to go back into isolation and spend more time in contemplation and have a lot of space. And that's the other thing that's been really amazing, is to realize the power of just creating a lot of space for my system when that comes on. And there doesn't have to be some logical plan for why there's all this space. The space itself, my system will start to do that as long as there's enough space, and it will follow a natural cycle of new awareness. And then it's nothing but wonderful to come back and offer. And it's a beautiful reinvigoration of spirit. And so I feel more connected to myself and a brand new layer, which allows it to express in a whole new way again. And it keeps me engaged in this work because it's never the same work, and I've had some of the same clients for 15 years or more, some of them. And I've heard them even ask, like, man, it's a long time. Do you ever get bored of this? Well, it's like, no, because I'm seeing something different every time because I'm not the same as I was 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
So to me, it seems like a necessary polarity for the keep it moving, for growth, because I would say my instinctual desire is to grow. Like, if I was told there would be no more growth and development, that would feel like a instinctual threat to my system. Like it would, like you would be telling me you're, going to snuff me out. So, those are not surprising to me that they are working on each other because they keep creating movement.
I love that.
Yeah.
Incredibly well stated. And so to round this out, I'd love to jump over to your 12th house. I'd like to do just one survival archetype. And so 12th house, we have the prostitute. And the 12th house governs the unconscious. And the 12th house governs intuition. And so what's really interesting is that the prostitute is very much the archetype of inner negotiation.
Interesting.
And the prostitute's always trying to guarantee some outcome that offers safety and security, which a lot of times comes into conflict with intuition.
Yes.
You might have an intuition that says, start this project, or, quit your job and do X, Y, or Z. But then the prostitute says, well, you're getting a steady paycheck over here, so that's a bad idea. And so you compromise or negotiate your intuition. So I'd love for you to share any experience you've had with this challenge of intuition and the prostitute being the inner negotiator.
Absolutely. As you were saying that, I was tracking it and noticing that I innately have a desire to continue to cultivate my intuition. And because the prostitute is in that area, it's a really good training partner. So with not enough intuition to balance it out, you get overpowered by the prostitute. So the interesting thing in retrospect is noticing how I used to completely overwork myself to increase my worth and value and, for safety and security. And I remember having intuitive insights that I would quickly be dashed by that inner negotiation, as you're saying. And the intuition just did not have the level of strength yet to stand up to that. And it wasn't clarified enough and cultivated enough. What I find interesting is that most of the way this wheel is set up is to give me what I want, and it has this interesting challenge because I want it at such a significant level. There needs to be some sort of energy to train with in order to cultivate a higher level of intuition in this case.
Right.
So I still hear that negotiation, while now I have the ability now to check in with my intuition and fully hear it without the negotiation of the prostitute just coming over the top. Now, it's still a big thing for me to work with, I would say, in more classical challenges like fear over finances or fear over place or home or something like that. And cultivating the ability to check in with my intuition to balance that has been so helpful. So, feeling what would be best for me versus just using that unconscious, pattern of energy to force me to do the obvious, logical, safe thing to my mind has been really fun, because my mind is really pretty powerful. And so it means that I need is equally a powerful intuition to keep it in check. So that's what comes up for me. And I think I was just asleep for a very long time and didn't notice any of that. And it was expressed in overworking and oversaving and kind of creating a situation where you'd start to hoard energy and you'd have actually more than you needed, but it's all driven by that pattern of like, you need more safety, and being closed off from being able to hear, is that really true? Do you feel unsafe right now? Like, what feels like, what you would like to do now? And I'm really grateful for that, because if I didn't have such an intense experience of that, I don't think I would have had something to work with in order to cultivate more intuition, which comes back into the tracking. It comes back into the Hermit. It all kind of flows together there in a really beautiful way. And it's always a surprise, because I never would have thought that, but I feel that now in a way that is really more balanced than it would have been, when I was in my 20s or something like that. So
Beautiful. I love how you said the prostitute being a great training partner.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the prostitute sits across from the detective.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's a very cool opposition as well. So this was such a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that we chose these archetypes and took a pretty deep dive into each one of them.
Yeah.
I would love for you to, as we close, to direct people anywhere you want to send them if they're interested in checking out your work, any of your offerings, if they're interested in working with you. Where would you like to send some of the listeners?
Yeah, for sure. If anybody want to reach out via email, it's justin@myointegrity.com. So you could reach out to me, or you can go through the website at myointegrity.com, and that'll get you just a way to contact me if you're interested in some support, if you're interested in some virtual coaching, or if you're interested in some movement support. And would love to help anybody who has some challenges finding their way with some challenging movement challenges, pain, all that kind of stuff. So that's mostly where you can find me. And I would love to hear from anybody who is looking for some help.
Beautiful. And Justin and I do have an upcoming retreat, which will be in August, and stay tuned for more info on that. Justin and I are going to do a follow-up episode where we're going to dive into some of the things that we're going to be exploring in our retreat together. And if any of you are interested in diving deeper into the archetypes, you can go to my website, healing40.com, and you can reach out to me if you want to cast your wheel. Highly recommend also checking out Caroline Miss's work. This is based on a lot of her teachings. She has a great book, Sacred Contracts, if you want to go deeper into some of the archetype work. And thank you again for going on this beautiful journey with us. It was such an incredible episode. I can't wait to share this with you guys. And just any last words as we close?
Just, I'm very grateful, Greg. Thank you for casting my wheel and having me on. It's been a pleasure, and my heart is just very warmed by being included in this. And so I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having me on today. It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, brother.